Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Christopher Hoff. I'm the Senior Product Marketing Manager here at Cohesity. Today, we're going to have a fun and interesting conversation about our Global Cyber Resilience Report. Now, this is the second year that we've done this report, where we've talked to over 3,000 IT leaders about their cyber resilience goals, where they are, and what they're doing. Interestingly, this is one of the largest reports of this nature that's put out on an annual basis. What I'd like to do now is bring on our special guest. You know him from the Smashing Security and the AI Fix podcasts. He's an independent, award-winning keynote speaker and blogger. Just recently, he won both the Best Cybersecurity Podcast and the most entertaining cybersecurity podcast from the EU Security Blogger Awards. I'd like to welcome Graham Cluley. Hey, Graham.
Hi, Chris. Thanks very much. That was awfully nice what you had to say there. Thank you. It's a delight to be here, and I'm looking forward to discussing some of the fascinating findings from Cohesity's report.
It is an interesting topic. We talked about cyber resilience, but before we get into the report, I actually want to pick your brain for a second. You've been involved in the security industry for a little while. We've gone through a number of definitions of malware, right? From viruses to worms, Trojans, spyware, adware, APTs, and now the topic du jour is ransomware. And I'm kind of curious. Ransomware's been around for over 10 years now. I think 2012 was the first time that we used the term. What are you seeing? Is it still a relevant term? How is it changed in the past 10 or so years?
Well, it certainly still is a very pressing problem, and one of the main ways in which cyber criminals are, of course, making money. So the attacks keep on coming, and it's continuing to evolve. So I'm sure many of the people who've tuned into the webinar today are aware about double extortion techniques, for instance, where they don't just encrypt your data, and that's why you have to pay them a ransom, but they also exfiltrate sensitive information as well and threaten to publish it on the web if it's not paid. So that's one method. But that's double extortion. But we've moved on from that. Now we also see triple extortion, where they may, for instance, threaten to, in addition, launch a denial of service attack or notify regulatory bodies. So we've seen some ransomware groups where they hack a company, they tell the company they've been hacked, and they then go and report it to the SEC, saying this company should have told you by now that they've been hacked. They've suffered a security breach. We notice that they haven't done it yet. So they also give you that kind of threat if you're not prepared to pay up. And then there are additional ways in which the attacks have evolved. For instance, supply chain attacks. So a ransomware attacker may say, yes, we've encrypted your data, we've stolen your data, but in addition, if you don't pay up, we are going to launch attacks against your customers as well and cause them problems. If you're a managed service provider, for instance, they may threaten to do that. Other things that we're seeing, there's this thing called big game hunting, where the ransomware gangs are targeting large, high-profile organizations with greater financial resources because they recognize they have the potential to successfully crowbar out of them even higher ransomware faces. And sometimes they're also exploiting brand new, recently discovered vulnerabilities as well. So the attacks are evolving. Even though ransomware has been around for a while, it is continuing to become more sophisticated and potentially much more dangerous.
Interesting. It's good to hear that it's still relevant, because I mean we use it all the time, or at least I use it all the time as kind of the de facto replacement for cyber attack. And
yeah,
so what's interesting is the threat is evolving, but in our report, if we move forward and start looking at the actual data, some themes started to come out. And what's interesting is, based on what you just said, is that the victims of the attacks are feeling pretty confident, right? We've had
Mm.
some themes coming out of this attack, out of this report, and we're feeling pretty confident in what we're doing. Um, what do you think about uh, how this is playing out? What we're seeing from our results so far. I mean, we've got ransom payments going up despite do not pay policies. We'll talk about this paradox for confidence, and most frustratingly, I think, is this what we're calling an alarming deficiency with zero trust. Um, are these themes that you're seeing on a regular basis, or are there other themes that we should be looking at?
Well, it's wonderful that the report is identifying that a lot of companies are feeling confident about mitigating these kind of attacks, because my feeling from reading the report is, well, that may be the case, but are they taking the right steps to address these kind of attacks? And it doesn't feel like it. Only 42% of companies surveyed said they could identify sensitive data and comply with applicable data privacy laws and regulations. So it does appear that there's a bit of a disconnect going on here. Suddenly, lots of companies are reporting they do pay, even though they may not have, they may have do not pay policies when it comes to ransomware. So, confidence, great that you're confident. Are you maybe a little bit overconfident? Are you perhaps fooling yourself and thinking, oh, well, we've taken these steps here and therefore nothing's going to hit us? The truth is, as we look at the newspaper headlines, pretty much every day, there will be major organizations who've suffered yet another attack. And if it can happen to them, maybe it could happen to you as well. So you've got to make sure that you have all your ducks in order. You've got to make sure that you've taken all the necessary steps, not only to mitigate an attack, but make sure that you're capable of recovering from an attack in a timely fashion as well. And that's really what concerns me, is that some companies may be walking into this a little bit blind, a little bit too confident, because this is a serious problem. And the reason why the cyber criminals, you say that ransomware is like the mot du jour, and has been for some, not just days, but for years now, is because it works. The criminals keep on launching ransomware attacks. It's a very, very effective way of earning them, in some cases, not just tens of millions of dollars, but hundreds of millions of dollars. So there are worries here. 42% of businesses don't appear to have deployed multi-factor authentication to strengthen their controls over accessing data. It's like, come on, guys, this isn't rocket science. How can you be confident and you haven't put the most simple, in some cases, defenses in place to prevent inappropriate access to your most sensitive data?
It's frustrating. I totally agree, and it's almost comical given that in our report, 67% of our respondents actually admitted that they were hit by ransomware.
Yeah.
It's little bit of a problem there.
Well, this
The
is the paradox you mentioned, isn't it? It's like, well, how can these two things exist at the same time? These numbers here, it doesn't quite compute.
It absolutely doesn't, and this is our report went across all industries. We
Hmm.
and of course, because it's a global report, we had respondents from many regions across the globe. Specific, the really the big three. Us here in the States, North America, you guys over in Europe, and APJ as well. But to see so many organizations in our next slide here, saying that, yeah, they've been a victim of ransomware, Um, uh, is this something that you think is increasing? Are you hearing more and more about successful attacks?
We are. And one of the reasons is, of course, now in most territories around the world, you have to declare these things. Regulators have picked up that this is a problem. And so they are requiring companies to go public about the fact that they suffered these problems. I mean, even if regulators weren't doing that, I would like to think that companies would be warning their partners, would be warning their customers and suppliers that potentially, and indeed their staff, that their data may have been accessed. It may now be in the hands of criminals, but there is this legal requirement more and more today to do it in a prompt fashion. So, from that point of view, I would expect to see more reports. But also, I think we've seen a lot of criminal gangs who work in all kinds of areas of crime. Maybe they've not even worked in cybercrime before. The traditional criminals maybe think, you know what? Rather than going and robbing a bank in person or going and thieving off some old granny, there are other ways in which we can make money. We can, the protection money we used to be able to get off restaurants and things, saying, "Oh, lovely business you've got here. Shame if anything happened to it." We can do that now via the internet with that beautiful veil of anonymity as well. They could be anywhere in the world, less likely that they're going to get collared by law enforcement or that they come to any physical harm themselves. So I think we're seeing traditional criminals definitely going into cybercrime. And we're seeing existing cyber criminals thinking, you know what really makes money? Because it's in the headlines all the time, is ransomware. So let's see if we can get ourselves a bit of that. And of course, these ransomware as a service models, where the criminal gangs basically give you everything, means you don't even have to have a nerd on staff. You don't really need someone super geeky to build this thing for you because you can pretty much rent it and off you go.
And they have gorgeous UIs too. Anybody with a little bit of cash and maybe some Bitcoin could absolutely become a player.
It's astonishing, and they even have help desk support. Some of these things. So if you're having a problem, a little pop up. I mean, some of these ransomware gangs offer better technical support than legitimate companies do. If only we could get the legitimate companies to answer our questions so helpfully as those guys do. So, I mean, there's in some ways there's a lot we could learn.
24/7 local language.
Right.
Yep, for sure, for sure. And and you mentioned regulations. I know over in the EU, DORA is coming into effect next year. That's gonna play a role in how organizations are responding, not just in the EU, but anyone across the globe who has business happening in the EU. Are there
Absolutely. Yeah,
are
so
there
when there are regulations like this, if you're selling into that territory, if you're doing business there, you've got to make sure that you're aware of those laws as well. So it doesn't matter if you're an American business, for instance, you still have to be aware about it because otherwise you could end up getting hit.
Yep. And it doesn't have to be a multinational. It could be, with small businesses as well. You could be a t-shirt company and somebody buys a shirt from you in France.
Yeah,
And now you have to apply by those regulations.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
are there industries that you're seeing that are getting hit more than others?
Well, it looks like the top industry sector which is getting hit is IT and technology. Um,
Ironic.
Maybe they've got more computers, I don't know. Maybe they're more internet enabled. You would like to think they'd be more savvy regarding how to protect those systems than some of the other sectors. But one of the serious threats there is the software supply chain. So many of those companies who are offering services over the web may be pushing out updates to their users as well. And we've seen this a few times with some high profile ransomware cases where it's not only the software company which gets hit by the ransomware, but their customers get hit by the ransomware as well, with an immense impact which can occur there. So IT and technology, banking and finance. Well, that's not so much of a surprise. After all, that's where the money is. That's where a lot of sensitive information is, which you certainly don't want published on the dark web. Government and public services as well. Well, the public has no choice about sharing their personal information, entrusting it to the government. You can decide who you will buy a good from or a product from. You can't, well, other than every few years, you can't decide which government you're going to deal with. And so if those institutions aren't protecting the data properly, and sometimes of course they're not well resourced and not well financed to have the very best in security as well. Another concern is utilities, the electricity grid, the gas, the water. Obviously, the impact of a cyber attack against those kind of institutions can have huge ramifications for the general population.
Sure.
And so there's a there's going to be an incentive for those kind of organizations and healthcare to resolve the ransomware problem as effectively as they can.
It's the everyday things. We're no longer in that world where somebody can say, oh, it's not going to affect me because I don't have anything that the bad guys want.
Yeah.
Well, they just want your money, and they're going to stop you. They're going to stop you from doing whatever you're doing until they get their money.
Yep. They've got no qualms, no scruples whatsoever. It is disgusting, but that is the world we live in, I'm afraid.
It absolutely is, and we also have to remember that a lot of these organizations are, to your point earlier about their support, they are legitimate, or not legitimate, but they are real companies. They have tech support, they have accounts payable and receivable, they have their own IT. They probably have HR as well, so that they
They
can
do. They
hire.
do. I was about to say, some of them actually do have HR departments where they look after the stuff. The people who. It's bizarre, to be honest. Quite what goes on in some of these ransomware gangs, and some of them, unfortunately, appear to be beyond the reach of law enforcement. Maybe because the countries in which they're based in, and the ransomware gang won't hit companies in that particular country. They will concentrate their fire. Hey, look, I'm skirting around the issue. Let's imagine they live in a country like Russia, for instance. They will attack companies based outside of Russia because they know the Russian authorities simply won't care that much.
For sure, and we've seen that for a while. I mean, all the way back to the days of Conficker. It was looking for the Estonian keyboard so that you
Right.
weren't infected.
Yeah.
But I wanna dig into something that you mentioned a little bit earlier, because in our report, um, there's this paradox, and I don't want to be that guy, but we had a number of folks telling us that um, they had, as a matter of fact, I think it was 78% of organizations had confidence in their company's cyber resilience strategy, their ability to recover. Um, which is the next slide here.
Mm.
The the interesting thing is, if if we look into that data a little bit, and here, let me go to the next slide. Um, Only 2% of organizations said that they could recover their data in 24 hours. Um, there seems to be a little bit of a discrepancy between our level of confidence, how good we're feeling about things, and our actual ability to perform. Um, I don't know what to make of this. What are
Yeah.
what are your thoughts?
It's a worry, isn't it? I mean, it sounds like they're feeling confident. They're clearly aware of the threat, but they don't have the right systems, the right processes in place to recover in a timely fashion. Because even if your company is only taken offline or unable to do business for 24 hours, that still has a financial hit. And it's more than just you can't process orders on that particular day, but there's damage to your reputation. There's damage to the confidence in your customers, in your partners, whether they want to do business with you any longer, which may continue to echo on for months and months, if not years, as a consequence. So I think it's not just how well you can withstand an attack, but how well you can recover from it, which is really, really important, because attacks will happen, may vary what kind of scale it's happening on, but how well can you recover from it? So I'd like there to be more emphasis on that. How are you going to deal if something does manage to get through? So feeling good about your current plans, that's one thing, but making sure you can execute your planned strategy to recover, that really is essential.
And it's interesting too, because be completely candid, sometimes I wonder if we vendors are a little bit to blame in this, because there are a number of vendors in Cohesity's space that will say, oh well, you get hit with ransomware, you just click this magic button and all will be well. You'll recover your data and everything will be fine.
Yeah.
Tends not to be the case. There's a few different steps between what you do when the power goes out, or a hard drive dies, or somebody's actually in your environment trying to stop you from doing anything but give them money. And there seems to be a lot of assumptions. We hear it all the time. People going through their disaster recovery plans and their incident response plans during tabletop exercises, saying, I think it should work like this, or it should work like that. Yeah, it's a fascinating problem. It's a frustrating problem. That's a theme here, I think. But with this paradox,
Yeah.
we've got another level to it. So in our next slide here, we had this interesting result of 69% of organizations said that yes, they've actually paid the ransom. And of that, 77% that said that they paid even though they didn't have a do not pay policy. Surprised?
I think you meant even though they do have a do not pay.
Yes.
You had a double negative there. And yes, that is of course rather strange, isn't it? I can understand why no company wants to announce we have a policy of always paying a ransom. I can that's not a good message to put out publicly. The truth, I think, is although no one wants to pay a ransom, not only for the financial reason, but because they're concerned about what kind of message it may send to other ransomware attacks. And if you haven't identified the means by which the ransomware gang got in and caused you problems, you may be vulnerable to additional attacks in the future as well. Despite that, sometimes paying the ransom is the best pragmatic approach, or at least the least worst. Let's put it that way. I can understand why companies pay ransoms. If that's the choice between, if the choice is paying a ransom, or we're going to have to go out of business, or we're going to have to fire half of our staff because we've lost so much work and we've lost our customers and the data's been these are tough decisions, but I can understand why they pay them. And of course, that's what fuels the ransomware business for the bad guys as well, unfortunately. So in an ideal world, no one would ever pay. I think we all know it's not an ideal world. What we need to do is better to protect ourselves in the first place and have the mechanisms and processes to recover and restore effectively and quickly as much as possible. Let's make sure we're prepared both before the attack and prepared for what happens after an attack as well, so that we can properly defend our businesses.
For sure. And to that point about preparation, we found a number of folks who, and we actually touched on it briefly at the beginning. people are not taking the basics into account.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, we have some data on this next slide here that less than half of companies have deployed role-based access, or MFA, or tools like Quorum for separation of duties. How do we get people to actually turn this stuff on? $1 million question.
Well, it's it shouldn't be $1 million answer, should it? I mean, this is all known that we need to do this. I think the problem, I feel some sympathy for IT teams because, of course, they're putting out fires all the time. And, I remember when I worked at a big company, I would regularly clog up the IT help desk by saying to them, my printer doesn't work, or I've got this problem, or this pop-up's come up, or whatever the problem may be. So you need to have teams which can work on these really important issues, like turning on multi-factor authentication, like limiting access to data based upon employees' roles, their responsibilities, like encrypting by default, not making it the exception. It should be the exception as to why you don't encrypt the data, or keeping systems patched, or enforcing some password policies like unique passwords or strong, hard to crack passwords inside your organization. Too many uh, things like offboarding when people are leaving the company, making sure those credentials are turned off so they can't log back in, or they old credentials can't be abused in future attacks as well. I really hope that we can do something to improve our cyber hygiene. What I would hate is for companies only to learn this lesson the hard way, by being hit first and then having to do its post-mortem, and then suddenly the board really, really cares about this because we can't have another one of those happen. I would love for more and more companies to learn these lessons beforehand in order to properly defend themselves. If you're working in an IT department and you feel that the C-level in your organization aren't giving you the power to take these steps, which I'm sure most people watching this, agree with and understand need to be done, then maybe you need to occasionally just wave under their nose the newspaper headlines and say, you know what? We're really lucky this isn't us today, because we haven't taken these steps yet. And it may be costly. It may, there may be some costs involved. There may be some time involved in doing this, but it's really, really important, because otherwise we could be the next big headline, and that would be so damaging for our business.
For sure. And to be fair, the folks who deal with identity are, in my opinion, doing a pretty good job at
Yeah.
making it easy. If I can turn on MFA and for my mother or my mother-in-law, then I think we might be okay turning it on in the corporate world too.
I think you make a really good point there, because consumers are getting much more used to it now, not only from the banks, but from their smartphones. And obviously there's still work to be done. And obviously it's something I would love people to sort of do by default, have those sort of things turned on. But I think people are beginning to wise up to it. And you're right. Even less technical people can cope with it. So there may not be as much resistance as you imagine from your workforce.
For sure. And let's dig into that a little bit about, because we're touching on some trends here. In our report, just under half of the folks said that they had all the security technologies and capabilities to identify sensitive data and comply with data privacy laws and regulations, which doesn't surprise me because organizations have hundreds of tools that they're dealing with. But at the same time, we've got folks who are saying that their estates are troubled, and the threat landscape is in need of what I'll call continuous improvement.
Mm.
Um, What are you seeing? What are you seeing in terms of where organizations are putting resources? What are the things that you think that they should be putting resources into to better prepare themselves?
Well, I thought this statistic was interesting. 42% say, we've got the tools. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're using the tools, of course. They may just, if you have the software box and it's sitting on the bookshelf behind you, that isn't necessarily defending your organization. So it has to be rolled out, has to be properly configured as well. But beyond that sort of technological solution, I also am seeing more money and effort going towards things like employee education and awareness, which is not only telling people how to look out for phishing attacks or be careful about the Word documents you open or enabling macros, those sort of things, but really providing comprehensive training uh, on recognizing some of the scams which are coming out, the social engineering tricks, and also explaining what the benefits are. So when you introduce something like multi-factor authentication, rather than just saying to people, we're doing this now, tell them the benefit, tell them why this is being done, what the benefit is to the organization, how this is going to make sure they still have a job in 12 months' time, because it'll be a safety net for, to protect them should they become phished one day. So those sort of things are happening. We're also seeing security assessments, penetration testing, which I think is a great thing to do. Hack yourself before someone else hacks you. So regularly evaluate vulnerabilities in your systems and networks and in the applications, identifying weaknesses proactively, um, and get visibility on where the data is on your network or in the cloud, what your crown jewels when it comes to data, your most important data, where actually is it? Whose computer is it on? What network share is it on? Is that the right place? Have the right people got access to it? So investigating that has got to be a really important thing to do, along with things like network segmentation, constantly looking, how can we properly harden our defenses from attackers?
For sure, for sure. And there's a growing trend that we're seeing around um, building what I like to call integrated security architectures. Making these tools talk to each other, which
Yes,
is useful, but from kind of a forward-looking perspective, as we're building out more integration, we're taking more advantage of our tools. One of the topics that keeps coming up, and this is a little bit of an aside, quite honestly,
mm,
is we can't have a webinar without bringing up AI. And for all those out there who are following with their buzzword bingo cards, you can check that one off. Um, as organizations are looking at how to use their tools better, uh, do you think that there's a place for AI today for organizations?
absolutely. I think I mean, first point to make is that the cyber criminals are using AI. They're using it to democratize their attacks. They're doing attacks on a bigger scale. They're using some of that technology to make their attacks more convincing and more successful. So, by golly, you should be using artificial intelligence as well. And there's a number of ways in which artificial intelligence, I think, can help cybersecurity teams defend themselves. For instance, AI is really good at sifting through large swathes of data and information and finding patterns. So it can help you detect anomalies on your network, unusual behaviors. It can help classify data if you're trying to work out what data you have where inside your organization. And it can also be used to detect ransomware and ransomware like behaviors as well. So I think AI can bring enormous benefits. And all of this new technology should be being used not only to mitigate against attacks, but also maybe help you with your recovery should an attack happen. Because I think what you really want to do is improve your recovery options. That's one of the outcomes which I've got from this report is improved backup and restoration are really, really essential. The less time that your company is down, the better. So AI, for instance, could even be used creatively. If you've had a cyber attack maybe 5 years ago, and you put together documents and policies and so forth, well, AI may be really good at sifting through some of that old information and summarizing it for you. So you don't forget something which you did before, but you learnt was really important. So artificial intelligence can be used in a variety of ways, both in terms of prevention, but also in terms of helping you recover from an incident.
Good insights. That's uh, so that kind of leads us into our next statistic. Half of, and we sort of addressed it, but the 54% of organizations are actually looking for ways to be better at detecting anomalies and determining their exposure.
Mm.
So it would be interesting to use something like AI in order to run through those processes. Um, we're coming up on time. So I wanted to get some final thoughts from you on what we could be doing in order to take this information and make it actionable, make it useful for folks. What do you think people can do with this type of information?
Well, here's one of the things. I think there's a variety of things you can do. One of them is that most companies these days will say, "Oh, well, we've got backups. We can recover because we've got backups." Okay, doesn't actually help you if your data's also been stolen and going to be published, but at least in theory, you should be able to get up and running pretty promptly. But when was the last time you actually checked if your backups work? When did you actually find out how long it takes to restore from a backup and how you can do that in a smooth fashion? Because it seems from this report that the vast majority of companies, it's going to take them days, if not weeks, to recover. So check your backups, make sure that actually works rather than just something like, oh, we've just locked away our data over there. I'm sure it will work when we dig it out later. Implement effective data access controls like multi-factor authentication. We spoke earlier as well about role-based access controls. Really, really important. Put those in place to better defend that data. There's ways in which you can isolate data, data isolation, classifying your data. These are really vital, putting these sort of technologies in place, because it can actually help you when you next come to renew your cyber insurance policy. They're going to want to see evidence of that. And indeed, you may even get a discount on your cyber insurance policy. Wouldn't that be nice to get some money back for a change, because you have these measures in place? So that, of course, shouldn't be the reason why you do it. It shouldn't be the end goal. You want to go beyond that. It's not just satisfying the insurers. You want to satisfy all of the interested parties, your shareholders, your employees, your partners, your suppliers, that you've done everything necessary to properly defend your company and to make sure that your company can come back online, be working again as promptly as possible should the cyber attackers actually hit you.
And restore clean data. It's
Absolutely.
it is amazing the number of organizations who hit that restore button and they put the virus back or malware back into the environment. Um, you mentioned a few times about things like testing and whatnot. One of the things that we're starting to see more and more of is organizations doing their tabletop exercises and bringing in the infrastructure team and the backup team. I mean, it's been a while since I've sat in a tabletop exercise, but I do remember, sitting around at the end of the day and saying, oh, and backup Bob is going to restore the data. We checked the box and we went for drinks. Proving to your point that Bob can restore that data is critical. Um, we're even seeing organizations who are taking their backup data and using it for things like threat hunting so that they can be more proactive. Because let's face it, you've got an entire copy of your data center sitting there, whether
Yep.
it's from the cloud or from a physical data center. We're seeing organizations who want to do more with that data. So this has been a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate you joining me for this one. For those who are interested in reading the full report, I would encourage you to visit us at cohesity.com and download the full report and think about it a little bit and what you can do, because there's some simple steps that you can take in order to make yourself more cyber resilient. So again, Graham, thank you. I appreciate you taking the time with us. And for all of you watching, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in the next one.
Sure. Bye-bye.